Ghost stories, legends, folklore, they're all so interesting to me, and at times can even be scary. One ghost story that I found interesting and sad and heartbreaking all at the same time was that of La Llorona, the tale of the weeping woman who is said to be vengeful and roam near bodies of water, mourning her children who she drowned in a jealous rage after discovering her husband was cheating on her. When I think of La Llorona, I think of Mexico and Mexican culture. However, what if I told you that there were versions of La Llorona throughout the world and there has been a back and forth about where the story originated from? This is the story of La Llorona. Welcome back to the annual Spooktober series on my channel. If you watched the last installment of this series about the skeletons found in Benjamin Franklin's basement, then you know why this series is so heavily delayed this year. However, I wanted to give a huge shout out to my friend and fellow anti-multilevel marketing activist, MLM Exit. That's what most of my returning viewers who are here for the anti-multilevel marketing content and anti-scam content probably know her as on Instagram. It's thanks to her that I'm talking about the legend of La Llorona today. She knows that I love all things spooky, and I've talked about how I love Dia de los Muertos. And in Poland, my family does celebrate All Saints Day, and the cemeteries get lit up in candles, and it just looks so beautiful. But anyway, I do love how Dia de los Muertos is celebrated, and MLM Exit sent me this beautiful song by Angela Aguilar called La Llorona. I don't want to get a copyright claim or strike for inserting even a small portion of it here, but even the music video is so beautiful and captivating, so I'll leave it in the description box below for you guys to go ahead and listen and watch it on your own time. I do have to apologize if I butcher any names, but Spanish is something that I never studied in school, and I know very basic things like how to count and stuff, but that's about it. I am going to do my best, but I just wanted to say that this is no offense to anyone. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry ahead of time. Before we get into the legend of La Llorona, I do have to issue a bit of a warning for the legend itself because it has to do with unaliving children. So if this is something that you cannot listen to, this is not the video for you, and I recommend you skipping this one. With all of that said, let's talk about La Llorona. As mentioned in the previous chapter of this video, I was introduced to La Llorona by MLM Exit. However, after she told me about this legend and I researched it a little further, I remembered a very specific episode of Riverdale that featured La Llorona. If you've ever watched Riverdale, Tony ended up becoming possessed by her, if I remember correctly. But yes, I have watched the absolutely ridiculous show that is Riverdale, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, not at all. With all of that said, you might be thinking that La Llorona is probably a scary legend, a ghost story, if you will, and in my opinion, it is scary, but it's also very sad and heartbreaking at the same time. La Llorona itself means the crying woman or the wailer. She is a Mexican ghost that is said to be vengeful and likes to roam near bodies of water, mourning her children who she drowned in a jealous rage after discovering her husband was cheating on her, and that is according to Wikipedia. There are more variations to this legend, though. According to libraryofcongress.gov, they state, quote, "Sometimes La Llorona sees you from afar and pursues you, terrifying you as you flee towards your home. Sometimes she appears riding a horse. Sometimes she appears in your horse-drawn wagon or in your car, warning you against bad behavior before disappearing, just like that other famous spirit, the vanishing hitchhiker. In some stories, an encounter with her is fatal. La Llorona is often closely associated with children. In some stories, she is said to wail for her own lost or dead children. In many of these stories, she unalived her own children when she was alive and is doomed for her actions to be a wandering ghost. In other stories, she appears mainly to women who have children, while others, she kidnaps children who are never to be seen again." End quote. Guatemala also believes in this legend, but according to their story, it said that there was a woman who lived in Guatemala City who had an affair. Because of this affair, she actually became pregnant, and once her son was born, she drowned him in order for her husband to never find out about the affair. Once she made it into the afterlife, it's said that she was told to search for her son wherever there is water. One interesting part to Guatemala's version of this legend is they say that if you hear the cry of the wailing woman from afar, that means that her ghost is nearby, but if you hear the cry nearby, it means that she's far away. What I also found really interesting, you're going to hear me say that a lot in this video, I apologize ahead of time, but that this legend is also told in the Southwest United States, which is the country that I reside in. Not in the Southwest, but in the United States. The legend of La Llorona is told to scare children to be careful near water and not put themselves in dangerous situations. According to Wikipedia, they state that in Chumash mythology, which is indigenous to Southern California, La Llorona is linked to a mythological creature with a cry that is similar to that of a newborn baby. And I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, but I will leave it up on the screen. And it seems like it's pronounced Nunasis or something along those lines. Venezuela also has their version of this story. It was said that this is set in Venezuela, but in the colonial period. Their version of La Llorona is the spirit of a woman who died of sorrow after her children were killed, either by herself or by her family. I read that families would place wooden crosses above their doors to keep their home safe from these types of spirits. It kind of reminds me of my parents' house growing up, where the priest came in and blessed the house and they wrote some letters above the door. Now that you have an introduction to the story of La Llorona, let's get into more of the nitty-gritty, the origins of La Llorona. A lot of the information I'll be speaking about was taken from the website, the libraryofcongress.gov, but their one article had so much information about the origins of La Llorona, and it goes down a rabbit hole. But when talking about the origins of La Llorona, there are usually two types of stories, and according to this article, quote, interestingly, scholars have suggested that these two types of La Llorona stories may come from different streams of tradition. One of them is indigenous to Mexico and the other brought from Europe. Consider, for example, this story. The people heard a weeping woman night after night. She passed by in the middle of the night, wailing and crying out in a loud voice, "My children, we must flee far away from this city." At other times she cried, "My children, where shall I take you?" This certainly falls within the range of details we would expect in a traditional La Llorona encounter story, but it's actually an account of a bad omen that occurred in what we now know as Mexico City in 1509, 10 years before the arrival of Hernan Cortez and his Spanish troops. The account was collected by, I'm going to put the name up on the screen, but it is Bernardino de Sahagún from Nahuatl speakers in Mexico, who lived through the events that they described. The interviews probably occurred in the 1550s and were included in both languages in his work, The General History of the Things of New Spain, also known as the Florentine Codex, Book 12. According to Book 8 of the Codex, they talk about who the wailing spirit is, and they talk about Ciacuatl, who is an Aztec fertility goddess. However, in the Codex, this goddess is also referred to as a demon, and how this demon walked around the streets of Mexico, weeping and saying, "My children, woe is me that I must soon leave you." In another book, Ciacuatl is referred to as one of the most important goddesses to the Aztecs. This same goddess is usually associated with children. In this book it states, and they also say that she carries a crib with her, as someone would who carried her child in it, and she goes to the market among the other women, and disappearing she would leave behind the crib. When the other women discovered that the crib had been forgotten there, they would look to see what was inside, and there would be a flint-like iron of the rough kind, with which they killed those they sacrificed. By this, they understood that it was Ciacuatl who had left it there. End quote. Now, Ciacuatl and La Llorona are compared because both of them have a link to infanticide. In the Florentine Codex, there is a portion from Don Martin where it talks about how Ciacuatl ate a small boy in his crib. As you can see so far, some history points to La Llorona originating from the Aztecs. Then there is Americo Paredes, who in 1971 talks about how there could possibly be more indigenous folklore that was added to the story of La Llorona. Quote, "The literary legend of La Llorona struck deep roots in Mexican tradition because it was grafted on an Indian legend cycle about the supernatural woman who seduces men when they are out alone on the roads or working in the fields. At times, she destroys her lovers after giving herself to them, but often she is helpful as well as passionate and may make a man's fortune or help him raise a fine crop of corn. End quote. I know that I'm doing a lot of back and forth of where La Llorona originated from, but this is to give you whatever information I can find. I say that because, yet again, there is someone by the name of Basil Kirtley who stated that the origins of La Llorona aren't from indigenous Mexicans, but from Mexico's Spanish descendants. Kirtley states, quote, "The events of the La Llorona story take place in a Europeanized milieu, and the characters' values, their responses are thoroughly Spanish, not indigenous. Outside of a European social system with its insistence upon a particular and devious kind of sexual propriety, the story becomes incomprehensible," end quote. He stated that La Llorona could have also been inspired by European ghost stories, specifically the legend of Medea, and to Puccini's Madama Butterfly. With all of that said, there is evidence to show that there was a La Llorona in Spain. In 1866, there was a story about La Llorona published by Jose Maria Leon Dominguez. In this story, there is a character named Elvira, but she is a weeping female ghost named La Llorona. Domino Rene Perez stated, quote, "An accounting of La Llorona's history helps us to see the weight and endurance of this legend, as well as the various forces that helped shape it. La Llorona has been with and a part of greater Mexican cultural tradition for approximately 500 years, as testament to the power of a Chican storytelling tradition that includes La Llorona. Her stories endure into the present," end quote. As you can see, there was a lot of back and forth on where the story originated from, and maybe it was taken from different cultures and countries. However, I do know that Spain invaded Mexico, and I was wondering if maybe this had something to do with the origins of the story. That's why I decided to ask my friend, who, again, some of you may know as MLM Exit on Instagram, about this since she is Mexican. But here is what she had to say. According to her, she said, "Yes, Spain invaded Mexico. That's why you see a lot of European aspects, buildings, and people's physical appearances in these parts of Mexico. And actually, the truth can be somewhere in the middle, because the part where I am aware that La Llorona started was Guanajuato. I think that's how you say it. Apologies again if I said it wrong. But this was one of the states that Spain did conquer." With all of that said, let's go over some of the other versions of La Llorona from other parts of the world. As you saw in the last portion of the origins of La Llorona, there was a bit of a toss-up of where La Llorona truly originated 100%. There are other stories throughout the world that would kind of mimic La Llorona or are slightly similar. Weeping women legends have been found in Iberian and Amerindian cultures. Some people have said that they found some similarities between La Llorona and Eve and Lilith of Hebrew mythology. Then if we go all the way to Germany, they have their own version that goes way back to 1486 called Die Weiße Frau, which, if you don't know, means the white lady. In Greek mythology, there are similarities between La Llorona and the demi-goddess Lamia. Zeus's wife Hera found out about his affair with Lamia, and Hera ended up unaliving all of the children that came out of that affair. Because Lamia lost her children, she would in turn unalive other women's children. Another Greek legend would be that of Jason and Medea, which at one point talks about a woman who unalives her children to get back at her husband, who left her for another woman. If we go back to Europe, part of Slavic mythology talks about a water spirit called Rusalka. Apparently, this spirit comes after a woman drowns due to unaliving oneself or someone did it to her, especially if said woman had an unwanted pregnancy. There are also so many more, but if I were to go over all of them in this video, I would have to make this a 2-part series. But it is so interesting to know that so many different cultures and countries have their own version of La Llorona. Before we get to the last part of the video, I wanted to share some videos that MLM Exit shared with me and their sightings of La Llorona. I think I would be absolutely terrified if I saw La Llorona in person, but let's go ahead and show some of these sightings.
¿Crees en la Llorona?
Well, now that we're at the end of the video, I loved going down the rabbit hole of La Llorona. From what I've seen from research and from researching about Dia de los Muertos, La Llorona seems to be mostly dominant in Mexican culture. Now, I may be wrong, but this is from an outsider looking in. Yes, other cultures also believe in her or have their own version, but I just think of Mexico when I hear La Llorona. I always love a good ghost story or some kind of legend because being from New Jersey originally, we have something called Weird New Jersey. My friends and I used to do Weird New Jersey stuff all the time. I miss those days, especially now that I've been in a different state for so many years. But anyway, I do find the story of La Llorona both interesting and just heartbreaking. And it also angers me at times. But with all of that said, thank you for watching, and this is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. I forgot to say that in the last video. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, bye!